don't know why I was sitting in the back just watching the last presentation, and I kept going over and over my head how much this industry has changed. I started in the early 90s, and fly-by-the-wire didn't exist. Crew sketching was where I started. It was by paper and pen and a ruler. Load planning was done by a calculator and a very early Excel spreadsheet. And here we are, 30 years later, and we're talking about using advanced biometrics, which is not where it needs to be yet, but it's definitely coming. And the motivation behind that, which wasn't mentioned, is the fact that while most of us in this room are probably closer to my age, the next generation are going to demand it is this way. And that's a big part of why the industry also has to evolve quickly to satisfy the demands of our oncoming consumers. So I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm going to go through digitalization in operations. I'm going to touch on a few areas, not all necessarily linked, but I think it's indicative of some of the opportunities that we see. I'll start with supply chain. I think we've already heard presentations on this today. Arguably one of the biggest issues that the industry is facing at the moment. Post-COVID, it's still lingering in terms of some of the challenges that we're seeing. If you write one story out of this day here in Geneva, this should be one of them. So we did a survey earlier this year, just asked our airlines, where are the pain points, where are the opportunities, where can we put some more focus as an industry to try to help address the issue, recognizing that there's no short-term fix here. Spare parts shortages and long lead times was number one. Long turnaround times was number two. Repair capacity is an issue, and sole source suppliers are an issue, especially on engines. And then parts reliability is always a factor, and is cited as top four issues in terms of where our maintenance challenges, our maintenance departments across the industry are facing the greatest amount of challenges. So we believe digitalization can help. It is an area where the supply chain management, predictive analytics, blockchain, use of blockchain, tracking of for greater visibility, possibility at some point for the use of AI. But change has been a little elusive in terms of this part of our business, and it also is very dependent on the state of the existing manufacturer and where they are in terms of technical foundations within their company. But there are a couple of areas we believe that we can start at right away. So technical record standards across the industry is a bit elusive. It doesn't necessarily exist. Each government has their own set of sort of standards or regulations that they expect the industry or airlines within it to follow. And we believe that more work is required here to develop sort of a roadmap in terms of how technical record standards could be best managed from a digital standpoint. That work is starting in earnest. And then the other area is really around improving transparency, visibility of inventory, and supply chain. So when I wrote notes for this yesterday, I was thinking, think about it if you were today, because it's very common that you're looking to buy a new vehicle. And that manufacturer tells you that that vehicle will probably be available maybe in 2028, but there's no guarantees. How can anyone plan a network, plan a business around that sort of ambiguity or lack of clarity? So we believe that there's all kinds of opportunities in managing this better, providing greater visibility of the stock. It'll reduce shortages. It'll also reduce behavior which has existed now. It was something most people in this room has probably heard of, just in time. Anyone that's been around supply chains has been talking about just in time forever. We're not just in time anymore. In fact, we've gotten the complete opposite of that. And more mature carriers will actually start hoarding parts now to make sure that they protect their operation. That is the antithesis of where we need to be as an industry, and greater visibility as to why we believe that transparency is important. We do provide a product. It's a bit of a shameless plug on behalf of IATA, but it is a valuable one, which is why we put it in there. We do have one. There's many on the market. This one happens to be one of the bigger ones. It's called MRO Smart Hub, and it's meant to address some of these things. It's at this point not where it addresses all of them, but we believe that it has provided the potential to continue to add industry. Currently on this platform, we have over 1,000 users and 450 companies that sit there to provide information to our members. So certainly some opportunity in terms of the maintenance front on the supply chain. Not necessarily completely related, although if you do damage an aircraft, it's definitely going to have a supply chain impact. And so, we are obviously focusing on aircraft damage, and there's a digital component for this as well. We put lots of shock and awe values in there and what this potentially could be by 2035. But the fact is, it's costing us billions at the moment, and there's an opportunity to reduce those costs. The key areas where we see it, I don't think is anyone big surprise to anybody. Passenger stairs, belt loader, cargo loaders, and boarding bridges. Basically, anything that has to mate to that aircraft is in some way, shape, or form causing or has the potential to cause that damage. So, what's the answer? Anyone have a new car in this room? Anyone drive a car in this room? If you drive that car today and you come within a foot of something, what happens? Makes noises. Most of our equipment on the ramp today does not have that technology. Why? It's expensive. Back in my airline days, the oldest piece of equipment we had that was in operation was 60 years old. So it is a very expensive proposition to replace all your GSE. What we have to, and the answer is what we refer to as enhanced GSE, but essentially is that it's sensors, it's automatic shutoffs, it's data from that particular piece of equipment that'll tell you who's operating it, where is it, how fast is it moving, is it operating as per standard operating procedure, all those things that will make the ramp safer and also reduce ground damage. So what are we doing to we're trying to sort of keep track of the performance of the industry in this as they begin to embrace and onboard enhanced GSE. This year we've got 66 applications from ground service providers, or 14 ground handling and rest airlines in terms of looking for a certification. We certified 26 that says they actually meet the criteria to say that you're operating with this type of equipment. Next year we will see an exponential growth in that because we will add it to our requirements as part of our ISAGO audits, which will then see a number jump to 250 plus applicants in terms of being able to size where we are and where we need to go as an industry in terms of accepting this. One challenge, however, as the industry is now getting more like 60 to 70% ground handling service providers versus self-handling, the ground handler has to pay for it, while the airline receives the benefit. Now, this story is not new because we have the same debate in airports. Who invests in the biometric? Who gets the benefit? So we have to make sure that this is a balanced approach and that we recognize and have a strong business case for industry versus just looking at who pays for it and who benefits from that. If you're interested in more detail, I encourage you to go and I think this report or this presentation is provided after or during. We can go in and see as much detail about damage as you want. You'll probably be a little bit depressed at the end of it, but I can tell you it's well worth the read, and it gets down into a bunch of different breakdowns beyond the sort of high level that I just touched on. Baggage, our favorite operational topic, related to ground as well, but believe it or not, even that old doll has an opportunity to improve from a digital standpoint if we get at it. So, no surprise, 1 in 5 customers say that they've lost or been impacted by a bag in one way, shape, or form, which was come out of our latest global passenger survey. And if you haven't referenced that, I encourage you because it's one of the best voices of the customer that exists in the industry. How are they impacted? Mostly it's around delayed bags. Sometimes it's damaged bags, then it starts to get into a little lost bags. Fortunately, that's less. Comfort bags, much less, and then other. We've gotten much better at this as an industry. When I first started running airports many, many years ago, Our passengers arriving without baggage were well into the double digits in terms of bags per thousand. That's now into low single digits, but it's still a problem that needs to be addressed. And it's one of the #1 dissatisfiers from a customer standpoint. So this is an interesting slide, so we can sort of understand what the expectation of our customer is, which again comes from our global passenger survey. But over the majority, 52% believe that recovery of a bag should be within 24 hours. I can tell you that our stats aren't quite that. And then if you look at a large percentage of that, 32 feel that it should be within 12 hours. And I can tell you we're nowhere near that, especially on international flights. So there's again a growing need for us to do more here. One way, and this doesn't sound very sexy, but anyone that's worked in operations in the airline side of things will recognize that most of the messaging, if you think that P&Rs and tickets that we saw earlier were antiquated, this is more antiquated. It is reliant 100% on Type B messaging. Green screen technology that has a GUI front end on it, but ultimately it is very limited and very costly. And we believe through XML, eventually Jason, we have an opportunity to improve that. We will this year, and by the end of this year, we'll have run a couple of trials on airlines that are using it from an airline to an airport and start exchanging what they say is XML messaging. And the reason being that this will allow and unlock a huge opportunity for the industry in terms of being able to not only reduce costs, which is in the hundreds of millions annually, but also will allow for better messaging, pictures, just a better system in terms of how we be able to understand where things are and how we can recover them. So it's a big initiative that will grow as we see this year. This time next year, I definitely will, if I'm still here, God willing, we'll provide you an update on where we are in terms of its acceptance and where we plan to go next. Another area which is really important is our tracking. Now, this is a #1 issue for customers. It's also the #1 issue when asked what's stopping you from connecting a bag, or would you connect a bag if you had more confidence in being able to track it. So we are looking at Resolution 753, which is something that the industry adopted a few years ago, just to see, take a pulse check, where are we? Good news is we're actually seeing some pretty big uptake. Certain parts of the world way ahead of others. North America is pretty solid. North Asia is in the high 80s in terms of this implementation. It's really simple. It's tracking bags at 4 points. Now, some airlines choose to do more, but it's really acceptance, it's unloading, it's transfer and arrival. And having those data points to be able to share within the company itself, but also with the customers. Just think about that, how easy it is to have that information to be able to isolate where did the bag go missing? Did it actually get on the airplane? Did it come off the airplane? Did it make its transfer, or did it actually go to the baggage room? It's pretty simple stuff. And as you can see, we still got some work to do in terms of making sure that getting our industry where we hope to be. And the last area, and this is very, very much in line with what Yannick was talking earlier about modern airline retailing and one order. So you think about a bag tag today, I mean, never mind the environmental consequences of how many tags we're issuing in a run of a year, which probably would justify fixing it. If you have to reflight a bag, if you have an irregular operation, and that bag, and I've seen it, thousands, have been responsible for actually removing thousands of bags from an airport terminal and putting them in the hangar so that media couldn't take pictures of it. When things really go bump in the night. You got all these bags, you got all these bag tags, and every single one of them has to be manually manipulated, scanned to be able to understand where that customer went and where do I send that bag. Just imagine how complicated that is. And in this world, with an electronic bag tag, which the standards are already available. You fix that in one swoop. All you need is an internet connection, and it'll reflect that bag for you. So we really are going to dig in on this. We're going to update the standards. We're going to, most importantly, work with governments, because that's the biggest, in some ways, the biggest hurdle in terms of its acceptance. I think anyone in this room recognizes anything that governments are reluctant to change, and so we need to be able to convince them otherwise. But it's a huge opportunity on the baggage front. And lastly, and this probably of no surprise, there's a huge, huge opportunity in terms of using operational data to improve safety and sustainability and efficiency. And we sit on tons of it. In fact, a lot of it was sitting on and nobody knew what to do with it. And we're trying to change that. So we have a global aviation data management program, we call it GATM. It has been a labor of love. It started out small, luckily been involved with the team since the beginning, and it's basically 4 components. But it also takes data from all kinds of sources. IATA, which you may be familiar with, the world's global safety audit, which we manage. ISEGO, other audit programs are being ingested. We also get other types of data. The 4 key areas: flight data, FDX, incident data, IDX, maintenance cost data, MCX, and accident data, ADX. And within each one of those, we're at various stages of onboarding the industry in terms of its usage. FDX are about 25% of global flights. IDX, we have 293 airlines participating. MCX 40 plus, but we just renewed that. We're going to grow that, and based on the supply chain stuff that I mentioned earlier, this will grow pretty quickly. And then ADX obviously has been around for a while, but we digitized it to help be able to put our accident data more regularly and be able to follow up when we don't receive the reports, which is something that we've talked about. I'm sure Mark may have mentioned earlier. So these are the areas in the sandbox we're in. There is no database like it, and it is fast becoming the reference. So our goal for next year is to collect over there's 35 million flights today. We've got 30 million flights in the FDX program, 9,000 aircraft that are speaking to us. And this is capturing parameters every second of every flight that's in it. So the amount of information available is immense, and the benefits from it are immense from an oversight perspective, but also from the operator's perspective as well. I won't get into this, rather technical. For the pilots in the room, happy to talk about it afterwards, but this is just a couple of use cases in terms of how we're using the data. So terrain collision avoidance systems are all over the place, obviously for good reason. We used it specifically in Latin America, based on a rise that we've seen in TCAS warnings, and using the data to be able to understand the reaction to these warnings, to be able to look at standard operating procedures to improve our reaction to them and avoid them as well. So that's one example. And then another example where we use it for predictive analysis. So using airports and aircraft data to try to help look at potential issues that may occur, and using it for predictive risk assessments in the future. And an efficiency gain. So we used to go, and we still do actually, and we're not the only ones, go out and do fuel audits. I've done myself. We look at the aircraft, the airline operator themselves. What's your engine cleaning program? What's the weight of your aircraft? How often do you weigh it? What do you have on board? The electronic flight bags, and all these things. And you have, what's your program to manage it? That's it. But there was no benchmarking capability at all, 0. So what FuelIS, which is a new program we developed in 2024, gives airlines is basically an opportunity to compare themselves to everyone else. So if I'll use an example, if you're operating a 320 from Toronto to Vancouver, and some other carrier is operating the same aircraft type, you can actually drill in to see what your performance is like versus your comparators. and see if there's areas of flight that perhaps you're not doing such a great job on. Takeoff, landing, in-flight, altitude, speed, all those things that can go a long way in terms of reducing or working on your number one cost within the industry, which is, or second, depending on the airline, it's under fuel or people. And so this is a game changer in terms of being able to allow airlines with greater access to information in terms of how to manage fuel more efficiently. So that's it. I tried to be as brief as possible. Those are just a few areas that could go on all day in terms of where data is changing us. We seem to learn things different every other day, but it is a lot happening at once and a huge amount of opportunity. So that's it from my side.
Perfect. See if there's any questions. Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned 40% of the damage done to aircraft is by the machinery on the tarmac. What's the other 60%?
Could be anything, could be catering, could be towing. We see a lot of towing incidents. They're the ones that usually get the social media attention. So it's a range of issues, none of which sort of jump out, you know, in terms of the percentage-wise. So there's, you know, it's a lot of it is some of it in the hangar itself as well, which would be kind of not categorized the same as if in operations. So it's a mixture.
Kevin?
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. On the Fuel S program, I just want to confirm that the airlines that participate in that you don't get information that you can identify the airline, correct? Yeah.
Everything is done on a factor of 3.
Right.
So that to avoid that problem. That's in almost everything we do.
Right. So can you just give me an idea of, you know, the extent of in terms of numbers of airlines that are participating in that, you know, so that you can understand how important the benchmark is, and the regions. Are there airlines in certain regions?
We just launched it, so it's too early to tell. And I know that the consulting team manage it, and I know that they're in a large amount of discussions with. They will use the word a large number of airlines, but I can't give you specifics. I do know that I was part of the team that launched it at the AGM discussions around it, and there was a significant amount of interest. It's just you know, embedding that into their costs, but for sure there'll be a lot of uptake on this.
Yeah.
Hi, Nick. We enhance ground support. Do you see a difference in regional uptake? Are there certain regions that are a little bit more enthusiastic in moving towards the enhanced ground handling?
Well, I think, yeah, you tend to see Asia Pacific in certain locations, some of the obvious ones. North Asia, very ahead of the game in terms of adoption of new technology. I know there were some speculative questions around why Hong Kong, but anyone that's traveled in Asia will see pretty quickly that the adoption of biometrics and adoption of anything that's going to be more efficient is already there. But you know, in general, no, there's not a significant, like, other than those areas, it really boils down to the airlines themselves and the budgets. I mean, you know, I joked when I said we have GSE that was 60 years old back in one of my previous companies. But the fact is, you know, if you were to replace it, it would cost you $1 billion. And so it takes time for this to get implemented. And there's nobody standing in the way. It's just a question of where it fits in the budget process.
Nick, about the fuel efficiency monitoring on flights. It's obvious and clear that the companies can get figures and can monitor it. But what about crews? Can that be not an additional stress factor for crews if they don't meet the standards? Have you made any survey on that?
Well, I don't know, I've been around this place too long probably, but my first answer would the buck stops with the captain, and they put as much fuel on an aircraft as they want. And just anecdotally, as an industry, pilots put on what they call granny fuel whenever they want, whenever they feel, and they're never questioned for it. And that's the way it should be. You know, if a pilot feels, but it's not about saying whether or not I'm going to have an extra 100 pounds, 200 pounds of fuel. It's just primarily would be looking at your flying profile. So, you know, some airlines use their dispatch systems for that, but it's only good enough for you. So that, you know, I like to fly at 38,000 feet and I want to fly at 150 kilometers an hour. Some airlines may decide to take go at a lower altitude and a slower speed. So a longer stage length, burn less fuel. So really, it's more about that than it is about getting into individual flights and whether or not a pilot's making decisions on how much fuel's on board an aircraft.
Thank you, Nick. Perfect.
Thanks, everybody.
I'd now like to invite Brendan Sullivan, our IATA's Global Head of Cargo Squad, who's going to speak to us about digitalisation in air cargo.
Good afternoon, everyone. So again, my name is Brendan Sullivan. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm going to walk you through some of the digitalization efforts that we're going through specific to air cargo. The first thing that I want to mention is that digitalization is one of our 3 industry priorities. So it's absolutely a top priority for us in the industry and for all of our members and all of the stakeholders within the supply chain. Part of that is because it actually helps us underpin the other priorities that we have, such as sustainability and safety and security. We've already heard about the effect of data and digitalization on those 2 areas throughout aviation. For us specifically, we're looking at the move away from legacy standards, which were peer-to-peer messaging standards, based on 50-year-old technology, towards a data sharing approach using more modern web APIs. That's going to help us be faster and more efficient, and once again help us drive and underpin many of the other initiatives that we're working on. Collectively, we are calling this the IATA One Record Standard, and it's the key towards digitalization. First, it provides a common global data model where we can define all the data that is required to be shared across the supply chain. Air cargo can use up to 30 individual documents, many of which are paper, with lots of different data in it. And so this actually allows us to define all of those different aspects into a single global data model for harmonization and for consistency. It improves the communication across the supply chain because it actually allows the different actors in the supply chain to access that data only once, rather than sharing it and repeating it and typing it in and potentially leading to errors. It will improve the visibility and the transparency, which is a clear requirement from the shippers and customers of air cargo. And it also enhances the quality of the data. Once again, it's not recheating, it's not repeated as a message and shared to another party. It's accessed via these web APIs. It's shared by the people who have it and own it to the people who need it for that particular function. And because we're using web APIs, it's obviously a lot easier to connect. It's a lot faster to connect parties, and essentially puts us in a place to be future ready when it comes to digital cargo for any requirement that comes up that goes beyond the capabilities of the existing messaging standards. Now, One Record works if it's implemented, and if it's implemented widely across the industry. There are use cases that work within a single company, but it works best when we're talking about sharing this data across the supply chain. So we've had over 200 companies involved in pilot programs. 10 of those are actually moving towards advanced operational implementations. We recognize the need for governments to be involved, so they've been involved in a number of these proof of concepts and pilots as well, from the European Union, the United Nations, in the United States, in China, and other government authorities. That could have been customs or security or other regulators. We've done a number of hackathons to try and test and design and figure out and explore new use cases that might exist, where we've had over 800 experts actually develop 100 projects, some of which are actually operational today. We recognize that air freight is multimodal. Everything that flies moves first by surface, and then there are many things which fly and then use surface mode as well. And so the requirement is that this standard is harmonized across all the modes. We're targeting an industry-wide adoption of 1 January 2026, where the industry would be capable of using the one record standards and exchanging data across the supply chain. A number of the service providers, the big IT service providers in the industry, have actually embraced this. They have this in their roadmaps, and that represents a coverage of about 80% of the IT service provision in the industry, which is fantastic. And we've taken an open source approach. This is to drive that cooperation and to make available those resources. That's part of why the hackathons are so successful, and that's part of why we have as much industry scaling as we do. So a couple of examples of one record actually in action. The first one is in Hong Kong, the Greater Bay Area. And the uniqueness of Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area, if you're not familiar with it, is that a lot of what moves, in particular during and since the pandemic, will move across a number of modes of transport. So we'll have a small amount of road or surface transport. That might go to another terminal, and then that will move by barge or by maritime, followed by an air leg for the large international Trans-Pacific. So that was the example used here. The same data was shared, and so Houston Logistics was able to access the data and share it with Cathay and with Hong Kong International Airport across the supply chain. So data created once, owned and retained by the data owner, and shared seamlessly across the supply chain with those parties who needed it for the specific function that they needed it. This obviously reduces any redundancies. What will often happen is that the road transport documentation will have to be rekeyed into maritime documentation, will have to be rekeyed again into air transport documentation, and shared amongst the supply chain parties. This actually eliminates that. It means there are less or no inconsistencies in that data, and it's obviously a lot faster. In addition, the tracking and information and visibility on where the shipments actually are was shared across the supply chain, so the customer has full visibility on what's happening and why. Another example from the same part of the world, this time using an IoT device. This is an Internet of Things connected device. We use these a lot in air cargo because we transport sensitive, either by temperature or by conditions, cargo. So the example that was tested here was actually semiconductor thermal paste. It's particularly sensitive to the conditions that it's being transported in, and so we have attached these devices to them, to the packages, to monitor the condition of the shipment. In this case, the freight forwarder was able to access the airline's Internet of Things information to verify the condition as well as the actual location of their semiconductor thermal paste. And so they were able to access that via web API, very quick connection, and they're accessing the same information that the airline has so that they can be proactive in their decision making and they can understand and have confidence that the conditions that they require the goods to be maintained in are being maintained. Another good example of that is in air transport. We do transport a significant amount of vaccines. During the pandemic, we moved around billions of doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, but we do that on a daily basis. They have very strict temperature control requirements to maintain the viability of the vaccine. And so again, we apply these temperature monitoring devices And so the shipper was, in this case, able to access that, again, via an Internet of Things platform to understand all the conditions that were happening in real time to the vaccines as they were moving throughout the supply chain. So that could have been the temperature on the ground, as well as the temperature in the air, and everything that happened in between throughout the journey, making sure that ultimately what gets into the patient's arms is actually exactly what was intended when it was developed. We also wanted to look at how can we speed up this process of digitalization in air cargo. The industry is making progress, making good progress, but what are the other levers that we could explore to speed up the digitalization? So in 2023, the Cargo Advisory Council, which is our members who offer advice to the to IATA, to the industry, took a look at this and they decided to develop a digitalization leadership charter. It's built along 5 pillars. The first, developing a unified and collaborative digital strategy. So this is ensuring that we have interoperability of the standards. They're harmonized, that as we move forwards, we can move across modes of transport, and the entire supply chain is well served. The other is, the next is enhancing organizational resilience. So this is around cybersecurity and the infrastructure, as well as the responsible use of new and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. Digitalization is a great way to help us in our sustainability journey, having that data, understanding it, and so there's also a focus on supporting eco-friendly technology initiatives using that data responsibly. For pursuing digital excellence, so there are many emerging trends, many of which will actually help air cargo jump forwards in its digitalization journey, and we need to track those and stay ahead of them. Probably the prime example is generative AI, where that may help fill in some of the gaps in digitizing some of our documentation. And the last is using technology ethically, embracing those emerging technologies in a responsible fashion. This group actually is meeting right now twice a year. We launched at World Cargo Symposium this year with 5 signatories. We are currently at 17 signatories, with more to come before the end of the year. So like I said, they meet twice a year and they discuss ways that they can enable and cooperate along the angle of speeding up digitization in the air cargo industry. In North Asia, actually, we just earlier this month launched the North Asia Digital Cargo Alliance, which brings together another 15 companies, leaders in the space, some of which are already signatories of the charter, and some of which are to join in the future, but really the same 5 key principles, and seeing how they can leverage what's happening in North Asia and really speed up digitalization. I talked about these devices that we use in air cargo. We use them quite a lot. Sometimes it's shippers and freight forwarders who place them onto packages and containers. Sometimes it's the airlines themselves. And they're very important for the purpose of monitoring the conditions of transportation. But there are a number of different requirements to be met when it comes to approvals for these devices to actually be used. So that could be interference or cooperation with the aircraft systems, as well as things like battery safety. So we have developed an air cargo device assessment to streamline and expedite that approval process of these tracking devices and data loggers. We had previously developed a recommended practice on what those approvals should look like, and so we help companies who have those devices to actually show that they are in compliance with the recommended practice, which then allows the airlines to speed up their approval process. So it doesn't replace the airline approval process, but it helps facilitate so that they understand what conditions have already been met, and that those devices have actually already gone through a certification process. So we've actually had the first certified company, so it's Living Packets, they have a secure and reusable smart package, and we just finished the device assessment for its packaging shipping solution called The Box. And really this adds an element of efficiency for the industry, so that people who make these devices can show what steps they've already gone through. The airlines can uptake that much more quickly and improve their own approval processes. And then it provides a uniform way to make sure that we can help improve safety, so that we don't have as many potential devices out there that don't meet the requirements of the regulations. So with that, I thank you very much. I'm happy to answer some questions around digitalization in air cargo.
Thank you, Brian. To what degree you see that the air cargo can be affected by the rapidly evolving geopolitical and economic situation globally, and in Middle East and Africa especially?
It's a significant amount of uncertainty, I would say, in the industry. And there's probably the two aspects to that. There's the geopolitical portion of it, where we've had trade disruptions this past year. Some of that has affected air cargo directly, with the requirement to circumnavigate and fly around certain areas. The other has actually affected it positively, which we saw in the Red Sea, where we had to, the maritime sector was the one that was disrupted, and air cargo was in a position to actually take on that freight and move it. So both sides actually, sort of an upside and a downside to that geopolitical. And the other is what we see in terms of uncertainty, how it evolves on the trade side and the trade policy side, all of which is a little bit unknown. We've just had a number of elections this year, including in the United States. There will be trade policy changes very likely, and we don't know what they will look like. I think the one sort of bottom line is just to remind you just how resilient air cargo actually is. Air cargo was nearly completely stopped during the pandemic and immediately responded to that. And the entire industry was struggling, and air cargo was in a position to actually continue to move goods that started with PPE, then vaccines, and continue to support global supply chains everywhere. So there will be further disruption. I think we can see that, and it's a significant headwind for the air cargo industry to pay attention to. But it's something that the air cargo industry is relatively used to dealing with, and will continue to be resilient